Welcome to the making of the Global Heart Championship title belt, brought to you by the FWP in cooperation with the FWP Art Department and the Global Heart. Part 1, Epoxy Hearts. I begin by downloading a copy of the Global Heart Healing logo, trademarked Global Heart Healing, and printed it on high-gloss photo paper for inspiration. Metallic purple acrylic paint proved the perfect complement to the pieces of beach glass I had collected from the shores of Okanagan Lake. Upon these fragments I painted the words for the title belt. Joy Harris, for whom I was crafting the belt. Global Heart Champion, honoring the Global Heart Healing Group. Joy Harris as its leader, and her work to open and heal the global heart. And Joyful Energy, a tribute to Joy's healing practice. Joyful Energy Heals. The Global Heart Healing logo was carefully cut and trimmed to fit within the ceramic heart, selected for the epoxy mold. The time arrived to mix the epoxy for the initial pour, which would form the piece's front. The room's temperature was regulated to ensure optimal conditions. The epoxy was thoroughly stirred and a release agent applied to guarantee a crystal clear finish. Prior to pouring the epoxy into the mold, it was meticulously cleaned with alcohol, followed by a thin application of silicone lubricant as a release agent. Once the first epoxy layer had cured, the Global Heart Healing logo was placed in reverse. Holes were then drilled to accommodate pieces of special green glass gathered from the beach. To promote proper adhesion of the next epoxy layer, the hardened epoxy was sanded. The second epoxy layer was poured and the painted beach glass carefully positioned within. Given that the bottom would become the front, the glass was placed upside down. A lighter's flame was employed to gently eliminate any surface bubbles. Nearly all were removed, except for two persistent bubbles clinging to the glass fragment bearing the word heart. On the reverse of the second layer, my initials and a trademark symbol for the Global Heart Healing logo were inscribed. These markings would remain unseen once the piece was mounted, but I know they're there. The hardened epoxy was then sanded once more in preparation for the subsequent layer. A kitchen scale was acquired to facilitate the measurement of larger epoxy quantities, eliminating the need for multiple containers. Before commencing the next epoxy pour, threaded inserts were prepared by filling them with wax to prevent epoxy intrusion into the threads. These inserts were carefully positioned and the third epoxy layer was poured. A torch was used to dispel any trapped air bubbles. A bright light cast across the surface, revealing subtle imperfections. A delicate sprinkling of holographic glitter was then introduced, intended to shimmer behind the words and logo. A second epoxy pour had been prepared to immediately follow the glitter application. However, upon pouring, the glitter began to shift. It became evident that the epoxy required a brief setting period before the final layer could be applied. Consequently, the prepared epoxy was discarded and a fresh batch was mixed. After approximately 4.5 hours, the epoxy reached a tacky yet not fully solid state. This condition allowed for another layer to be poured without the need for sanding. As the epoxy level approached the end of the thread inserts, an uneven surface was detected. My leveling desktop equipped with 4 adjustable bolts was employed to rectify this issue. This final fourth layer of epoxy needed to be perfectly aligned with the insert ends. The following day, with all the epoxy fully hardened, the wax was removed from the threaded inserts. Attempts to use heat and a paper towel proved ineffective due to the small thread size. Scraping with a needle followed by threading a bolt proved to be the most successful method. Research had suggested that ceramic could serve as a suitable epoxy mold. It was hoped that the application of silicone lubricant would facilitate easy release. However, it was also acknowledged that the mold breakage might be necessary. The force required to fracture the ceramic was surprisingly substantial. Unfortunately, some fractures occurred on the epoxy pieces during the removal. Fortunately, the smooth ceramic surface combined with the silicone lubricant imparted a smooth finish to the epoxy, resulted in exceptionally clear pieces. Despite minor flaws, all three pieces presented well. A brief filing process rounded off the sharp edges, and the project advanced to the next stage, mounting these creations on a strap. Tune in next time for part 2. Get my belt!